So we're going to start here in Revit, and I'm going to imagine I'm taking the role of an architectural designer, and I'd like to design using components supplied to me by my manufacturing partner. And I want to know that they're up to date, it's correct and current information, and I want it to be configurable, but I want those configurations to be known manufacturer information. I don't want to design anything that can't be made, and so I'm going to use Informed Design. So within Revit, I have the Informed Design plugin loaded. I'll come across to the product button and click. Then I'll select the Autodesk Construction Cloud account and project in which my manufacturer's data is stored. And I could give the manufacturer permission to share their content directly to my current project, or the manufacturer could use Bridge to share a whole project's worth of information with me at the same time. I'll select the subfolder and I'll choose this Doorset to insert. We can see that we're on the current release, and if there was an update from the manufacturer, we would see that here. We can check out the details. This looks great, so I'm going to choose Open. And in this case, the manufacturer has already set up some pre-configured options for us. So we can choose from configuration, appearance options, and dimensions. Or if we select from the pre-configured options, we can see that there are a couple of standard options. And as we select these options, we can see the information below change. Or we have this custom option. And the custom option allows us more scope to make choices about what we'd like to have in our project. But you can see that some of these have been configured by the manufacturer. So for example, if I choose a door finish of painted, you'll notice the facing and the door core material automatically update. Those choices have been made by the manufacturer. When I'm ready, I can come down and choose Generate. And that will send my options up to the Informed Design service, and it will return the Revit family to me. But I'm going to choose an option I've already generated. I'll come up to Select, and I can see here a list of pre-generated options. Anybody, anywhere who's created a variant based on this design, the options will appear here. As I select these options, I can see I have a painted option, left and right, and I also have a veneered option, left and right. And once I've found the option I'm looking for, I can then insert this into my Revit model. Now I can also see that the manufacturer has helpfully supplied a couple of representations here for me. The primary representation is the full manufacturing detail, all the nuts and bolts and screws, everything that's needed to manufacture this item. But I don't want that much detail in my Revit model. I'm going to select this version called BIM, which is a simplified version that's been created by the manufacturer just to help me keep my Revit model performant. So I'll select BIM and come to Insert. I'll use my standard Revit commands to insert this item. And you can see this component's been added to the door schedule with all the information that's contained in the model supplied by the manufacturer. Now we can imagine that our final step is to bring this information back to the manufacturer. And we do that simply by saving this Revit model and then publishing to the cloud. In the next section, we'll see how a manufacturer can now take this information and extract manufacturing information for all the variants that have been used in this project. As a manufacturer, I'd like to look at the BIM and extract all the information about my product that's been used in that BIM, so I can then create the manufacturing information I need, things like drawings and bill of materials. So I have permission to access this Revit model that's been published to Construction Cloud. I'm going to come up here and choose Open Model. And I can see that there are a number of different manufacturing models being published here to Informed Design, but I'm only interested in the Doorset, so I'm just going to select them all. I can see information about each one, about each variant that's been generated. And when I'm happy that I have all the information I need, I'm going to choose to generate outputs. As a manufacturer, when I published this model, I also decided what assets were published alongside it. And I can choose to generate those for each variant that are available. So for example, I could choose all the drawings that I created for this model. And I can also choose to have the bill of materials for this model and an aggregated bill of materials, which is going to aggregate all the components that are needed for all the models that have been used in this design. Next, I'll choose a location that I would like to publish these assets to. So I could send these generated outputs back to Construction Cloud, or I could bring them into Fusion Team. I'm going to choose to save them within Construction Cloud. And in my Informed Design folder, I have an Outputs folder. So I'm going to choose Checkout. And if I'm happy with my choices, I can choose Submit Request. As a product manufacturer, understanding the requirements of the design, manually creating all the variants that are required to fulfill that design, and then manually creating the manufacturing data for each of those variants can be an extremely time-consuming process. Not only is it time-consuming for the designer or engineer who's working on that project, but there's a significant delay between the information being agreed and the information being passed through to manufacturing. Now that all our outputs have been generated, we can now go to our upload location and our assets are ready to be delivered on to manufacturing. Here we are on Autodesk Inventor. Let's learn how an Inventor user might publish their configurable model to Informed Design. So my model is complete and I've created all the manufacturing information I need, including my drawings, and you can see on here a parts list, which represents the bill of materials for this item. My model is parametric and it's configurable, and I have a little iLogic form over here that I can use to test. So for example, I could change the dimensions, I could change the configuration, and change the finishes. And I'll hit apply. And we can see the model apply those configurations. Now I also understand that the architectural designer may not want my full manufacturing level of detail. So I've also included a second level of detail in there that just removes some of the nuts and bolts and fixings and reduces the number of features. And that's just going to help the Revit designer to keep their model performant. Okay, I'm going to return to the manufacturing level of detail. Before we publish this item to Informed Design, we want to add some more information in there, some information that's specific for the Revit user. Now I'm back in my manufacturing level of detail. I will close this iLogic form and I will come up to the BIM definition tab. The BIM definition add-in is downloaded and installed alongside the Informed Design add-in. In the BIM definition tab, you can see that we can control the orientation of this model to make sure that the insert point and the orientation come in the way that we intend. We can also add some connectors. So if we want to connect into one of those Revit systems, like a ducting system or a piping system, we can add those connectors here. I'm going to bring you along to the BIM Properties tab. In the BIM Properties panel, we can add some of those Revit specific behaviors and information. For example, we could limit the hosts for this item to ceilings or floors. We can change the Revit category, and notice when we change the Revit category, we also change the information that's available to us in the form below. Revit category and family name are required by Informed Design, and we can insert those here. We can add information directly into the form, or we can map the information to the parameters or iProperties that we already have available to us in our Inventor model. That way, when we update Inventor parameters and iProperties in future, they will automatically be propagated through into the BIM properties, and then we can publish them straight up to Informed Design. When we're happy we've added all the data that's required on our BIM project, we can move on from BIM properties to Informed Design. I'm going to open up the product definition. The product definition is how we publish this item to Informed Design. I'll edit this existing product definition. You can see that we name the product definition, and also we tell Informed Design where to look for the Inventor project and all the files that make up the Inventor assembly. And it's a requirement of Informed Design that all the files that make up the Inventor assembly sit within that same root folder. That includes any files from places like Content Center. As we publish this design, we want to create some rules about how the Revit user might configure this item. We want to ensure that any configuration they do is manufacturable. So the first step is to adopt some of the parameters that are driving the Inventor model into the form that will be used inside Revit. We can't use the iLogic form because Revit doesn't have iLogic. So we're going to design a new form inside Informed Design. Once we've adopted the parameters we'd like to reference, we can then move on to rules. There are two sets of rules. These rules are governing the form and the way the form looks. You can see that we have the main part of the form, and then the form is split up into tabs, groups, and controls. And we can see those on the right hand side here. So we have our tabs, and then we have groups and then we have the controls. We can also add logic to govern the inputs. So in this case, we're adding logic to say, if the customer uses this standard code, then apply these sizes to the item. And you can see that in the form here. So if we choose a pre-configured code, we get a pre-configured set of options. If we choose the custom version, then some of the options are pre-configured depending on what we choose. And you can see here as we change the door finish, the door substrate changes. And that logic is all defined here in the Inform Design code block editor. Okay, once we've got our form designed, we've added some logic to govern the inputs to make sure that whatever inputs are applied by the Revit user, they can't input a requirement that is not manufacturable. We can then take a look at the outputs. So the outputs allows us to control what sort of outputs we'd like to have available, both for the Revit user and also downstream when we do our generate outputs. So we're probably going to want to have an RFA available, both of our primary model state with all our manufacturing information and our BIM model state, which has been simplified. It is a requirement that you must select at least one RFA before you can publish to Inform Design. We can also choose from the available outputs to be generated later. So we may want to have an Inventor model generated for each variant. We may want to have the drawings generated in DWG or PDF. We may want to output our bill of materials, usually from the primary model state. That's the one with all the manufacturing information in. And we may want to allow some neutral file formats to be generated at the same time, for example, a step file. When we're finished, we go to Publish and Publish to Inform Design. And we can choose to publish to our customer's project if they give us permissions to do so, or we can publish to our own project and then use Bridge to share that on with our customers. In the Inform Design web app, I can see the dataset I've just published. I can see the release information, and I have the option to update the release status, giving me full control over whether this release is active or obsolete. And in this way, any Revit users with permission to use my dataset will only see the releases that I've given them permission to use, ensuring that my manufacturing data is always up to date wherever it's being used by anybody, anywhere in the world.